The Sikha we will be learning is look the Sikhas Chelik Ches Parshas Masei. The Sikha for Parshas Masei. The Rebbe says that Yidua was steht in Shalom and the Parshas Mates Masei und Dvorim. We know what it says in the Shalom concerning the Parshas of Mates Masei and Dvorim. So the Shalom writes as Tomit Chalim Bein Amtzorim Kihud Overbit. It usually comes out, always comes out in the 3 weeks Bein Amtzorim, which are the 3 weeks. Because that's the time that fits. In other words, what he's trying to say is that the parsha, the Teichen of the parsha fit to this time of the year, which is Bin Amtzorim. And there's dort Mevaya Barucha the Shayches from the Teichen of parsha bis to Bin Amtzorim. And he explains at length the connection of what the parshas talk about, these parshas, to the 3 weeks of the Bin Amtzorim. Now, there's man from Bein Amtzorim. Now, what is the Inyan of Bein Amtzorim? So the Rebbe I explained many times that time of Bein Amtzorim, which usually we look at it as if it's a time when we remember the Churban Beis Hamikdash, and we mourn the Churban Beis Hamikdash. But the Rebbe says, he said many times that the time of Bein Amtzorim is as dafke in ditek darf der rachakele bechol yem she'ov zayin b'schaskus yisera. At this time, the fact that we wait and we hope and we're waiting for Mashiach to come every day has to be stronger during this time. But the far zayin ditek mesugel b'yesed limit from Mesichta Midas and Hilchas b'Schapiro. That's why these days is a special auspicious time, fit more to learn Mesichta Midas, which discusses the size and the Gashmias, the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, and Hilchas Beis Hamikdash. Rambam talks about the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Why? He says durch dem Limud ve'esik in Suras Habayis, but Chonosei Mitzeov Meivov V'chol Tzerei it's called Chokesov because through learning all about the Beis Hamikdash, the tzura, the shape of the Beis Hamikdash, and the teichen of the Beis Hamikdash, and the ins and outs, so to speak, of the Beis Hamikdash, is Maila Ani Aleim Kilehem Asukim B'Binyan Abayis. The Eibush considers it as if we are actually involved in building Beis Hamikdash. This is all based, as you see, on a Medrash Tanchuma. That the Medrash Tanchuma says that Yecheskel, when the Eibush told Yecheskel about building the Beis Hamikdash, this was before the building of the second Beis Hamikdash, and it was the middle of Golos. So Yecheskel said to the Eibush that why is it so important now to discuss, learn about the building of the Beis Hamikdash when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, we're not ready to build, we can't build a Beis Hamikdash. So the Eibush said to him, you should learn it because first he said, the Eibush, that you think that because you're on Golos, you should not be involved in building the Beis Hamikdash. So it comes out that learning about the Beis Hamikdash is just part of building, and that's what the Loshen Medrash is. Ani Maila Aleim, I consider it as if they're involved in building. And the Rebbe has a different sikha, what the Rebbe explains at length what it means. But the bottom line is, because the time of the 3 weeks is a time when we strengthen our hope and waiting for Mashiach and the building of Beis Hamikdash, that's why these days is a time when we learn Hilchas Beis Hamikdash and etc., etc. Now, based on that, at the time of the Bein Hamtzorim, the 3 weeks, is a time when we strengthen our connection to the union of the coming of Mashiach. Is verstandig, we understand, as in the parshas Mates and Masei in Dvorim is merumes nit nor the avelis misat churban abayis chulu. So we understand that in these parshas of Mates, Masei and Dvorim is hinted not only the avelis of churban Beis Hamikdash. That's what the Shalom writes. The Shalom writes how the parsha talks about hints to the Churban Beis Hamikdash. But since it's this time of the year is not only when we think about the Churban, we also think about the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So obviously, it's clear that the Matis Masei in Dvorim, we also find an emes eich, the nit nur eich the inyan agula, concerning the gula, bifrat b'shaychet b'inyan abayis, and even more specifically concerning the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Rebbe is going to show how we find in the parsha a connection to the inyan of the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Is do a beer von Taten bekesher mit dem Posik der Parshasenu by Orei Miklot. There's a beer, the Rebbe says, from my father, in connection to the Posik that talks about Orei Miklot. Orei Miklot was a city, there's different cities that if a person killed somebody b'shegig unintentionally, he has to run away and live in any one of the cities of Orei Miklot. So the Posik says there, v'yoshav bo ad meis hakein agodel. The person who runs away to the Orei Miklot has to live there till the death of the Kein Godel. So in connection to this posik, the Rebbe says, my father has a biur, was laid them according to the beer that my father says, kum zu a taste beer in a halacha hashayches to bin abayis. We'll get another explanation in something that's connected to the building of the Beis Hamikdash, the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, as we will see later on in Sif Dalet and on, the connection between what the Rebbe's father says concerning the Beis Hamikdash, and it's connected to the time of the year. In Nashrim Peirik from Hilchas B'Sabchira Paskan, the Rambam, the Rebbe starts like this. In the first Peirik of Hilchas B'Sabchira, the Halachas of Beis Hamikdash, Rambam Paskans. These are the words that Rambam says. Ve'ein beinim bei, eitz beilet klal. That you cannot build in it, which means in Heichal Azara, you cannot build the Heichal Azara. We know the Azara is the outside, the courtyard, where you had the Mizbeach and you had different things. The Heichal is the building. Inside the courtyard, there was a building. The building was made up of 3 parts. The Kodesh HaKadoshim, and in front of that was the Kodesh, and in front of that was the Ulam. And altogether, they're called Heichal. So the Rambam paskins that in the Heichal, or in the Azor in the courtyard, you're not allowed to build eitz beilet klal, a wood that would stick out at all. Or it has to be made of stones or of bricks and plaster, but you can't have any wood. The Rabbi asks, what do you mean you can't have wood? There was a special chamber for the Kohen Gadol, and that was made of wood. And with the Mishnah sagt in Masechta Midas, it says in the Mishnah in Masechta Midas, as eine von der Lishka Shavazore is given Lishkas Ha'etz, but he is given Lishkas Kohen Gadol. It says in the Mishnah that one of the chambers, one of the offices, the rooms in the Azore was called Lishkas Ha'etz, and that was the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol, and it's called Lishkas Ha'etz because it was made of wood. So it's a contradiction. The Rambam says you cannot allow to put wood into the building of the Beis Hamikdash. And here we see there was one lishka that was made of wood. Is eine Frama Forschung was lernen, there are some Forschung that learn as lishkas ha'etz meint nicht that the lishka is gemacht geworden von den Eitzim. That when it's called lishkas ha'etz, it doesn't mean it's made from eitz, it's made from wood. Nor as the word blaze angerufen mit dem Namen zu look for the time was given of them. They give different reasons why it's called lishkas ha'etz, but that doesn't mean, according to those Meforshim, that the Lishka, that room, which was part of the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, was made of wood. It wasn't made of wood, it had other reasons. But the Rebbe says it's schwer anzunehmen the Pirush. It's hard to accept this pshat, while because Neusef of the Lefianias daite nicht Glattkeit. Von die Time, welcher sie sagen of them, but the Lishkas again Gordel wird die rufen. Lishka says, besides the fact that the Rebbe says, it's not so simple, according to his opinion, it's not so simple. All these explanations that they give why it was called Lishka say, it's not because it's made of wood. Other explanations, so each one of these explanations the Rebbe says is not so simple. Is not getting into it. But those biurim are not so simple. But besides that, is lishkas or eitz bepashtas made that the lishka is gemacht geworden von eitz. The general approach that it wasn't made from wood, but it had a name lishkas eitz for other reasons, says it doesn't fit to the words lishkas or eitz. The pashtas means that it was made of wood. And the Rebbe Letter 12 says there was a lishka called lishkas ha'etzim. That's something else. Lishkas ha'etzim is the room of the wood. That's it doesn't mean the room was made of wood. That's a room that held wood. But lishkas ha'etz doesn't mean that. And in order 13, the Rebbe says, we see, Lamashal, there's another lishka, another chamber called lishkas hagozis, which was not far from lishkas ha'etz. And it says, shois asuya gozis. The Gemara says that it was made, the text explains what the Gemara means in Midas. It was made, why is it called gozis? Gozis means a certain stone that was cut. And that was the stone that was used to build this lishka. So we see that the word lishkas hagozis, the word gozis is a description of what it was made of. The lishka was made of gozis. And the Taisus Yonta says the reason why it was made, because there's a Sanhedrin said in that lishka, so for their honor they made it with gozis. But the bottom line is we see that lishkas hagozis means the lishka made of gozis. So obviously, lishka ha'etz also means the lishka made of eitz. So to accept the pshat of the mafarshim that it means something else, it wasn't made of wood, is not understood, it's not simple. So therefore, we're back to the question, how could there be a lishka made of wood if the Rambam says you're not allowed to make wood, build wood into the structure of the Beis Hamikdash? So the Rebbe says, we could say as the Rambam gufet as bavorden b'diyak l'shenei, that you could say the Rambam answered this question by looking into the exact words that he says, Ve'ein beinim be'etz beilet klal. The Rambam said you cannot build into the structure of the Beis Hamikdash wood That's Beilet. Beilet means it sticks out. Fortunately, and some of us say, as if an etzem, a reinbuyen, an eitz, in a binyan is in Tokenisr. They just to build wood into the building of the Beis Hamikdash, there's nothing wrong with it. There's no prohibition, there's no Yisr. The Yisr is nor when their eitz is beilet with niker. It's only also if the wood sticks out and you could tell. And later in the Order 6, the Rebbe says, you look at the Order 21, then the Rebbe goes into a whole long shakla of Ataria. What does it mean? Does it mean that it can't stick out? But what happens if it doesn't stick out from the wall? You piece wood by the wall, and you could see the wood, but it doesn't stick out. Is that okay? Or it cannot be seen at all. That's why the Rebbe here uses both words. The Isser is only if it's beilet, and in parentheses he says niker. You could tell. Because according to some, it would be only if it sticks out. But if it doesn't stick out, doesn't matter if you could see it. And according to the one, you can't see it at all. But whichever way is, there's a special situation that we say that you can't build it of wood. Wood, not just stam. It can't stick out or be niker. And der Mokeh from Rambam is, where is the source of the Rambam? From Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Gemara Rosh Hashanah was brings the posuk in Masechta Rosh Hashanah brings a posuk. Shlomo HaMelech had geboidem chotzer hapnimis. That Shlomo HaMelech built the inner yard, which was the Ezras Kehanim, Ezras Yisrael, which is referred to the part of the Beis Hamikdash, which is called Ezras Kehanim. That's where the Kehanim, as far as the Kehanim are allowed to go, and Ezras Yisrael is a little more outside. That it's place where the Yidden could go. But anyway, he built it. The Gemara says, Shleisha tur gozis v'tur Christus arozim. He built, the wall was very thick, made of lines of material. So there were, he says, 3 lines of gozis, which means gozis is stones, stone that's cut. The tur crosses and arozim, and 1 line was made of cut wood. Arozim is cedar wood. So he had cedar wood, the Gemara says, built into the walls of Beis Hamikdash, Shlomo Melech. And the Gemara zogt the roof, and the Gemara says, Shlomo shoke bibinyan. Shlomo Melech stuck it inside the building. And Sadi besid, and then he covered it with plaster, which means he made sure that you can't see it. It didn't stick out and you couldn't see it. By doing that, he made sure that it doesn't stick out. Or according to some, not only it doesn't stick out, you can't see it. That's exactly what he did. He covered it. So here is a mocker to what the Rambam says, that what's the Isser only if you could see it. It doesn't, it sticks out or you could see it. But if you can't see it, doesn't stick out and you can't see it, we see from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, that's exactly what Shlomo HaMelech did, and you're allowed. Well, the Rebbe says, so according to this, we could say very simple, the Lishka was made from wood. Like the Rebbe said before, that the simple meaning of the words is, it was made from wood. And nevertheless, there was no prohibition, there's no avere. They took the wood that they used, they put it inside, in between the stones. The mashkia, they put it in deep, covered it with plaster, as his own design can eitz beilet, so that wasn't sticking out. So far we have answered the contradiction. On one hand, we had the kasha contradiction. On one hand, the Rambam says that you can't build any wood, and here we see there was a chamber made of wood. The answer is, the Rambam says it's only can be made of wood if you could see the wood, if it sticks out and you could tell. But by the Lishka says it wasn't that way. You couldn't see it. It was covered with stone and with seed, with plaster. Es bleibt aber nicht verstandig, but it's still something left that we have to understand. What we said before is a good reason why we were allowed to build it with wood, because if you cover it, it's okay. We need to understand what was the reason? Why would they build the lishka with lishka ha'etz? Why would we build it? Why would you need to build it from wood? Und then noch verdecken the eitzim in seed. In other words, you build it from wood, but then you have a problem that you can't be open, so you had to cover it. Or need, why wasn't it nor from avonim but the levanim? The other lishkas, why was it made or from stones or from bricks, like the other rooms that were there? In other words, it seems like there was a bedafke reason to make it from wood, but since there's a problem making it from wood, if you could see it, you have to cover it. Don't make it from wood, even though it's allowed. But what is the purpose? It seems like there was a need for it, bedafke, to make it from wood. The Tosfos Yontev is mavayim tam deruf. The Tosfos Yontev gives the reason. Das alderech with the Gemara is masbir for was the lishke seine given ausgestellt naifen. This is similar. The Gemara says that the way the rooms were made was set up in such a way was that geirem gen atircha yisayre ba'avedes kein gadol b'yom kippurim. which made it hard is that for the Kohen Gadol, extra tirche for the Kohen Gadol in the service of Yom Kippur. Because the rooms are, he went from one place to another, so he had to gain ahin and tzarik medorim latzofim medorim. He went back and forth. First he came from dor. He medorim latzofim means from North America, South America, North and South, and then South and North. Why did they do that? So the reason over there why they did this, that he should have a bigger tirch on Yom Kippur, he shouldn't become like a Balgaiva. He shouldn't have ego, because you see, he's after all the Kohen Gadol and he's doing Daveda. So they make him walk from here, walk from there. It seems that he takes away from his ego, from his Gaiva. So that's what he says like about that. The same thing you could say here. Why did they want to make it from wood? Obviously, a room built of stone is much better. It's stronger and it's choshevet. So they specially built it from wood, so it shouldn't take away. It should take away his guy. It shouldn't take away his feeling that he's a Kohen Gadol, and so you made it wood. That's a cheaper thing. That's a lesser choshev built room, and that's his room. As the Losh initially, to all of his mind shouldn't take him over that he should get too much gaiva. So that's the reason why bedafke they had it from wood. Aber l'chudas this nit can be a maspik. This is not a good beer. The Rebbe says. Besides, in the Orah 27, the Rebbe says, besides the fact that why would it be mazir daite? Because it's wood. That's only if you would see the wood. If you see the wood, and you know that why did they make it from lesser quality of material in my room over others? So you shouldn't be so think he's so special. But you didn't see it anyway. We said before that it was hidden inside the stones and it was covered with plaster. So what's the purpose? But besides that, the Rebbe says, there's a question. True. The idea, let's say, is true, that you have to make sure that he shouldn't get too much ego. But it doesn't make sense. Mahader sein in them, that they should be mahader in this. Was diktuis achshat godel. We should mahader in the fact he shouldn't become a balgaive. We will do something to take away that. And what is it that we're taking away? Taking away only achshad. So we're mahader in them was driktuis achshad godel as erenit kedeboy. What are we saying? We have to make sure that we have to make it a vote to make sure that he doesn't become a balgaive. In other words, we expect or we suspect he will become a balgaive. So we're doing something that expresses the fact that we're afraid that he's not going to be the way he's supposed to. Al derech with the Mishnah says avishas mish mashbiyah them kein godel as it mishanas and say that ayem it says an erevim keeper they would make the kein godel swear that he's going to do everything correctly, not change the seder what he's supposed to do. So the Gemara says after they said this to him, hein perishin abechin, they would go away. They goes on the Bezdin and on the Kohen Gadol himself, go away and cry. In other words, it's a far-fetched thing to be chesed. And what we're doing here is, if we're going to say the chat we said before, it was made of wood, because that expresses that we're chesed the Kohen Gadol, and he's not going to be so good, and he'll become a bagaiver. That's why we make it wood. So that's a hard thing to say. That we'd go through this whole tircha all to do something which expresses the fact that we're chesed that he's not going to be the way he's supposed to. He'll be a balgaiver. Bifrat ad neise was me bavont dem litazur daite rufashaf na tircha rabbe vaydase. This is all, and then especially that this is all in addition to they did something already that he shouldn't become a balgaiver. What did they do? As we said before, they made the rooms in such a way that you'll have to walk back and forth and back and forth. So there's other things already that we do. Besides that, the fact that before Yom Kippur, 7 days, they have to isolate him. That itself, Rashi says, makes it he shouldn't become a balgaiva. He becomes to push him away, and they make that, and the reason it shouldn't be Tomei. So all these things are enough already that express the idea that he shouldn't become a bagayde. So what should be Zolman noch meisiv sein in dem durch Meshana sein oder chol yemei hashana buyen the lishkas kein gadol hates him. And in addition, all the other things that he made that they did different in order to make sure so that they're going to make this another thing. It's not enough with the other things they did. And this is done. It was all that Ayim Kippur he shouldn't be tezor daite. But they made this change that it made of wood a whole year. So a whole year, the lishka of the Kohen Gadol has to be made of wood, so Yom Kippur won't be Tezuach Daite. In addition to all the other things with the Daite. That's very hard to say. So this shad, that the reason they bedafke made it of wood, is Tezuach Daite Olav, is hard to say for all the reason that we just said. So why was it made of wood? So we're back to the question, why was it made of wood? So the Rebbe starts off like this. The Rebbe said, my father, in his Aoras, he writes like this. Lishkas kein Gordel nikras, Lishkas eitz. Lishka kein Gordel was called Lishka eitz, nor calls man shakeanim gdelim hoi ksheir tzadikim. Only as long as the keanim gdelim were good people, tzadikim. Sheiricha yomim, that they lived long, Shimon HaTzadik, just like Shimon HaTzadik. 40 years it was kein Gordel. He lived long. So that's when those days it was called Lishkas Hoetz. Or benit noch Shimon HaTzadik. But after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, it wasn't called Lishkas Eitz anymore. Wenn man hat gebeten den Namen von Lishkas kein Godel, if Lishkas Parhedrin. They changed the name. What was the name now? Lishkas Parhedrin. Parhedrin means the Pekidei HaMelech, the officers from the king. Those were the Parhedrin. And what's the, so we're like calling the lishke of the officers of the king. What does that mean? So it says, because the Kohanim Gdolim then already used to pay money to get the position, and therefore they did not survive. Most Kohanim Gdolim did not survive a year because they were not the royally fit for this job. Just like these officers, which were called by the government, this was they all were appointed, got a job for 12 months. After 12 months, they would be changed. So the word parhedrin means is a remes to the changing of the guard, so to speak, the changing of the position that they did every year. And when the Kohanim Gdolim became the ones that were not so good, actually every year, basically, in average, every year they would have a new Kohen Gadol. So they called the lishka of the Kohanim Gdolim that are changed. So they got the name Lishkas Parhedrin. That's what the Rebbe's father brings from the Gemara Sichta Midas. And his Mavayir, so he said, and he says like this, it had the name Lishkas Eitz while the Kohanim Gdolim were good. When they were not good anymore and they would not survive more than a year, so then they changed the name to Parhedrin. So, but we have to explain first, why is it that when the Kohanim Gdolim did survive and lived longer, it had a name Lishkas Eitz? So that's what the Rebbe's father explained. The Rebbe is going to say. He explains. Eitz wood, a tree, shows for a long life. It says in Yeshaya Kapitel Samachei, the Novi wants to describe that he didn't have a ariches yomim, that the days of my nation are like the days of a tree. So the eitz, which is a tree, represents long life. Und das ist der Tag, was in dem Zman, wenn die Kohanim Gdolim seine gewähnt Ksherim, hat man es angerufen, Lishkas Eitz. This is the reason, when the Kohanim Gdolim were tzaddikim, were kosher, they called their room Lishkas Eitz, so the Bzeira Arichas Yomi, because they lived long. They didn't die every year. So they lived long, so they called it Lishkas Eitz, Shazeu Askaras Kosam. This is a way to mention the tzidkes. We want to mention that the Kohanim Gdolim are tzaddikim. So by calling the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol, we call it Lishkas Eitz, reminds us that these are Kohanim Gdolim that live long, because Eitz shows Arichas Yomim. That's when they called it with that title. But later on, they changed. Later on, when the Kohanim Gdolim did not manage to survive, so now they took away the name Lishkas Eitz, and they gave it the name Lishkas Parhedrin, which shows that they changed every year. Well, now, the Noch is a Tate Meis, then the Rebbe says, my father adds, Kohen Gadol Shayach Arichas Yomim. Bechlal, the concept of a Kohen Gadol, just the idea of a Kohen Gadol, is connected to Arichas Yomim, to long life. But Arichas Yomim, that's it. When you mean to live long comes from the right side, like the Pasuk says, Eirich Yomim b'Yemino, long days, long life in the right side. That's Yemin. That's Chesed, B'chinas Chesed, level of Chesed. But Kohen Gadol B'chinas Chesed, and Bechlal we know Kohen Gadol represents Chesed. Where do we know it from? There's a Pasuk that says, Tumecha v'yorecha leish chasedecha. That Urim V'Tumim, which is from the big Dikone, is Leish Chasedecha, is to the Ish HaChesed who had Urim V'Tumim, the Kohen Gadol. So Kohen Gadol B'chal is a level of Chesed. And Arichas Yomim is Chesed. And the bringt der Eil is, as in Yonif from Kohen Gadol is Arichas Yomim, that he brings a proof that the union of a Kohen Gadol is Arichas Yomim, long life. He brings a Raya from the Maimer Azal, from the way the Chomim tell us, but Negei Aherik Nefesh Bishgoga, concerning somebody who killed B'Shegig, unintentionally. But the din is, as muss bleiben bei ihr Miklotat Mesakein Agodel. He has to stay in the Ir Miklot, in the city of refuge where he came to, till the Ken Godel dies. And the Chazal tell us why. What does the Ritzeach, the murderer who killed by mistake, have to do with the Ken Godel? Why does he have to live there as long as the Ken Godel is alive? So the Chazal tell us, a murderer means he shortens the life of a person. The Ken Godel makes the life of a person longer. So it makes sense. So therefore, the one that shortens the life of a person should be there in front of the one that is Meirchim. We want to change it. In other words, it should change from Mekatzer Yom of Shalodom to Meirich. So from here we see also that the Inyan of a Ken Godel is Arichas Yomim. So the Rebbe's father says that it used to be called Mishkas or Eitz because Eitz represents Arichas Yomim, and these are good Kehanim Gdelim, so they had Arichas Yomim. Later on, it was not called Mishkas Eitz anymore. Okay. But then they added, as we said, that Bechlal, the concept of a Ken Godel has to do with Arichas Yomim. So Yeshlema that you could say, Adi Yisofe Beraye, Ados is in Yonish Ken Godel, Meirich Yom Shalodem, that when the Rebbe says, my father brings the Raya, that the Inyan of the Ken Godel is the fact that he's Meirich Yom Shalodem, that he makes the life of a person longer, is Zecha Yisofe, Bavoren and the Shaila now, this adds and answers the question that we asked before. Favos the Lishkas Ken Godel is given Gebut von Eitzim Davke. Why it was built? Why the Lishka was built from Eitzim? In other words, what we're saying here now is it was called Lishkas Eitz, but the Rebbe learns besides being called Lishkas Eitz, it was also made from Eitzim. It was made from wood. But why was it called Lishkas Eitz? Because Eitz represents Arichas Yomim. The Ken Godel is the union of Arichas Yomim. But we have the other thing. Why was it actually built from wood? The Rebbe didn't accept the opinion of the others that said that it wasn't built from wood. It was built from wood. It was built from wood, and it was also called Lishkas Eitz. It was called Lishkas Eitz because of what the Rebbe's father said, Tzarichas Yomim. Now he's also answering why it was made from wood. Das kommt nicht nur zum Rahmen sein mit Nomen Eitz wegen der Arichas Yomim Bepel von der Kehanim Gdelim Shal Tzadikim. It's not only like the name Lishkas Eitz, which comes to remind us that they're living long, the Kehanim Gdelim that use that Lishka are living long like a piece of Eitz. This comes to not so madkish sein as das is in Yonah shel Ken Godel b'chol azmanim. It to show us that this was the inyan of the Ken Godel all times. B'li unterschied the Ken Godel is bepeil Meirich Yom Manit. Whether the Ken Godel is Meirich Yom Manat. In other words, it was made from wood, and it was made from wood always. Even when they changed the name from Lishkas Eitz, it still remained made from wood. So the inyan that was made from wood represents Ken Godel. And that's why all the years the Lishka of the Ken Godel was made of wood. And then it was called Lishka Eitz only a certain time when they actually lived long. But the Rebbe will continue. So it was called always, it was made always of wood. Punkt für der Din from Yosef Shomo, bo ad Mesakein Godel is bechol azmanim. This idea that the Ritzeach had to, the one that killed, had to run away and had to stay there as long as the Ken Godel lived was always. Is b'chol azmanim. It was always, and the reason we said before that it's the Ken Godel is shows Arichas Yomim, and l'chura it's connected to the Kehanim Gdelim who had Arichas Yomim, but it's not like that. This din that the one that ran to Miklot had to stay there till as long as the Ken Godel lived was by all Kehanim Gdelim. That means that not only with the Kehanim Gdelim were tzaddikim and they themselves lived long. It's not only that. Because this din that the Rebbe's father brings the raya from the Ken Godel is the one that ran away is Mekasser Yom Shalodem. The Ken Godel is Meirich is all the years. So what is he showing is when the Ken Godel is not Meirich Yomim given. Even the Ken Godel wasn't Meirich Yomim, you still had to stay there as long as the Ken Godel was alive. And the reason was because the Ken Godel was is Inyan Arichas Yomim. This is a Ken Godel, not Meirich Yomim. But nevertheless, the Inyan of a Ken Godel, no matter what, is the union of Arichas Yomim. And the far is Lishkas Ken Godel, gemar geworden von Eitzim Davke. So the Lishkas Ken Godel was made from Eitzim. So we have all the things, now we have the whole thing set here. The Lishkas Ken Godel was made for Eitzim forever. It stayed all the time that Lishka was there, it made from Eitzim. It's the Lishka of Ken Godel. Why? Because the union of a Ken Godel is Chesed, the union of Ken Godel is Yemin, and Yemin is Arichas Yomim, and therefore always the Lishka of the Ken Godel is the union of made of wood. The name Lishkas Eitzim came, as the Rebbe's father says, was only there when the Bepel were Meirich Yomim. That's when it's called Lishkas Eitz. And later on it changed to Lishkas Parhedron, which seems to be a Chasson. Why is Parhedron the idea that changed every year? That's not such a good thing. That's a Chasson, that they were not Tzaddikim. So when they were not Tzaddikim, they changed it. Now, to what did they change it? From what did they change it? From Lishkas Eitz, Lishkas Parhedron. So the name was not there anymore because Lepel, we're talking at the time where the Kehanim Gdelim were not Tzaddikim. And the Rebbe in the Orah 33 says that actually, when we look in the Gemara says that what did they what was the name before? The name before was Belvati. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. But we're saying here before it was called Lishkas Eitz. So the Rebbe says that his father in Teres Levitzki says that Lishkas Ho-Eitz and Belvati are the same thing. Belvati is in another language that means Eitz. So what we're talking about is the name Lishkas Eitz. So Lishkas Eitz changed when there were no Kenim Ksherim. There were no kosher. Why did it change? Because they were already not kosher, so they were not Meirich Yomim. So there's no reason to make eggs. The Peil Mamish that was made of wood, always it had wood in it to represent the idea that the Kohen Gadol's Inyan is Arichas Yomim. So even if they didn't live the Peil but long, but the Inyan of a Kohen is Arichas Yomim, that's why the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol was made of Eitzim. Then the Rebbe said, in Pnimis, we still need an explanation. About das Inyan of Eitz is verbunden mit dem Kohen Gadol. Arichas Yomim, since we said the concept of wood, which is connected to the Kohen Gadol, because this is the Inyan of the wood represents it. Wood or tree represents Arichas Yomim. If he kommt as madar de Eitz verdecken mit Zitas is only sein Beilet. So why is it that it comes out that you have to cover it with plaster? We said before the only reason you could keep the wood or you put wood into the wall is because it was covered. You had to cover it. But we just gave an explanation that the reason why it was made of wood is because it represents Arichas Yomim. And that's always, even if the Kohen Gadol were not kosher, they still represent Arichas Yomim. So why did we all the years have to cover the cloud? Why did we have to cover it? Why wasn't it allowed to be open? It seems strange. Now it wasn't allowed because there's a din like that. So Rebbe says, Emes Taka, the din is as ein bein beitz beilet cloud. The reason you have to cover it because there's a din, you can't have wood there that's seen, that's sticking out that you could see. Aber jeder Prat im English oder betachels hat diuk und is Masei mit dem Teichen Inyan. But everything that was in the English is exact and has to fit with the Teichen. It's not only there's halacha, but Lepela came out that it turned out that it was made of wood, but the wood had to be covered. There must be a ruchnisdike meaning why the wood had to be covered, even though the wood represents Kohen Gadol, because Kohen Gadol represents Arichas Yomim. So the wood represents Arichas Yomim. And there still must be some Teichen in it why it had to be covered. As Alpha P, so there must be connected to the Teichen, as Alpha P, as in Yonesh Kohen Gadol is Arichas Yomim. And even though the Inyan of the Kohen Gadol is long life, that's why it was called Lishkas Ho-Eitz, hat es aber gemusst sein verdeckt. Had to be covered. Therefore, you have to understand. Bishleim in dem Zman noch Shimon HaTzadik made the time after Shimon HaTzadik, when the Kohanim Gdelim nicht Meirich Yomim given, when the Taka didn't live long, his movement was the Eitzim seine given verdeckt. We don't understand why the wood was covered. The Balda der Inyan Arichas Yomim Kohen Gadol is dem given verdeckt. Because the whole Inyan of why was it wood? Because the Inyan of Kohen Gadol is like wood, like a tree, which are Arichas Yomim. But when the Kohanim Gdelim were not good and the Taka didn't live long, so this Inyan that they represent Arichas Yomim was Behelim. It's still, Kohen Gadol represents Arichas Yomim. It wasn't seen because they didn't live long. So Begashmi is you have to cover the eights because what the eights represents had to be covered, had to be Behelim. But the Farat Moshe need gerufen the Lishkas Kohen Gadol mit Namen Lishkas Eitz Canal. That's why Taka they changed the name. They didn't call Lishkas Eitz, even though the wood was there, it was made of wood, because the Inya of what wood represents was not Begillah, was not revealed, because the wood represents Arichas Yomim and the Kohanim Gdelim were not in that level. So you have to cover it. So that's only when the Kohanim Gdelim were not good. Aber favosam the Eitzim gedarf sein mechusa eich kol zman she'akenim Gdelim ha yuksherim et tzadikim she'erich hayomim. But why was it that it always had to be covered, even when the tzaddik with the Kohanim Gdelim were tzadikim? So the wood actually fit to what they represent. So why did they have to cover it then? Because it was Begillah. When the Kohanim Gdelim were not good, so this whole idea of Arichas Yomim was Behelim. You understand that? So that's why in Begashmi the wood had to be covered. But when they were tzaddikim, so it was the Gilui de Arichas Yomim. So why was it had to be covered? Especially when these times when the Kohanim Gdelim were kshedim, that's the real time. In other words, that's the way those years had to be. Then the Kohen Gadol is Masim L'Mashnemer Vayavd La'aron Kedesh HaKadoshim. It says in the Pasuk, Aaron is separated and he's Kedesh HaKadoshim versus others. So that's what a Kohen Gadol is supposed to be. So it's possible, the Rebbe doesn't say that, possible that the years that the Kohanim G'delim, what I'm saying now is not, doesn't say, but that's the pshat. The years that the Kohanim G'delim could be more years than the good Kohanim G'delim not good, were more years than the Kohanim G'delim who were good. It's true. But the building should be built the way the Kohanim G'delim are expected to be. When they build the building, they build the room, the Kohen Gadol. It should be built according to what you expect. And what do you expect? That they should be tzaddikim and they should be ma'arich yomim. Lepel mamish, even when they were really the tzaddikim, it was covered. Why should it be covered? That's what the Rebbe says at the end here. The fact that those are the yonim shonim ketikunim. That's the way that it's supposed to be. So it's supposed to be covered. Why should it be covered? If it's really supposed to be that you have tzaddikim kohanim g'delim, and their arichas yomim was the gilui was revealed, so it should be that way. So the question is, why was it covered? The fact that it was wood, we understand, because wood represents arichas yomim, and why was it covered even when the kohanim g'delim were tzaddikim? Let me verstehen behagim abir in the Meibim der Bonte Maimer Chazal. To explain this, we have to first understand, give a beer in the statement of the Chazal that we mentioned, as noch Shimon HaTzadik in the name von Lishkas Kohen Gadol verbieten auf Lishkas verhedden. That after Shimon HaTzadik, they changed the name of this Lishke, of this room, this chamber from the Kohen Gadol, to the name Lishkas Parhedrin, and as we said before, so the them was the Kohanim G'delim haben sich jeder Jahr gebeten ki Parhedrin halol. The Kohanim G'delim changed every year, like these officers and this type of officers, that their term of serving was only a year. Every year they changed. So this time also, since the Kohanim G'delim changed every year, they call it Lishkas Parhedrin. It's not glatik, it's not understood. Eich noch dem Zman von Shimon HaTzadik seine gewähnt Kame Kohanim G'delim, seine gewähnt Tzadikim. Even after Shimon HaTzadik, there were quite a few Kohanim G'delim that were Tzadikim. Ma'arich Yomim gewähnt, and they lived long. They lived long, more than 12 months. We know that. And in the Order 44, the Rebbe talks about this. He brings that there were one that was 80 years, who was Yechanan Kohen Gadol. And then he says in Gemara Yuma, it speaks about after Shimon HaTzadik. It says there's these 80 years, first of all, after Shimon HaTzadik. Then there was the 10 years that there was a Kohen Gadol called Yishmael ben Pabi. And some say it was Rabbi Elazar ben Chasam. And then he brings from different places. There were Kohanim G'delim that were good. So Farvoza Marufen Dike Anim G'delim Tazanom and Lishkas Parhedrin. After Shimon HaTzadik, they changed the name. So from now on, it was only called Lishkas Parhedrin, which represented something negative, that you are not a tzaddik and you could be changed. Every year you changed. But at the time when the Kohanim G'delim were good with tzaddikim, why was also then it called Lishkas Parhedrin? Was his madgish? Why was it called Lishkas Parhedrin? Which stresses the rishus. Not the Kohanim G'delim, the rish is the evil of the other Kohanim G'delim. Which caused that they had to change every 12 months, which was he wouldn't live through the year. So why, at the time when you had tzaddikim, and this is after Shimon HaTzadik, they still was called Lishkas Parhedrin. The whole reason is because to show that these Kohanim G'delim are not good, and therefore they will not last more than 12 months, but there were times when there were Kohanim G'delim that lasted for a long time. Why was it called Lishkas Parhedrin even then? L'churvet must gekent Meyer sein, late in Yod Shingeret. Come upon this, I could explain this based on what I spoke many times. Ados was machlifnei sekol shneim was chedesh vayse famayla by the Kohanim G'delim. Normally we say that the fact that they were changed every month, every 12 months, shows a negative thing, that they were not worthy, they didn't deserve the position, therefore they didn't last through 12 months. So it's a chesed. But the Rebbe, I said many times, explained that even though that it seems like this shows a chesed, really this fact that they changed every 12 months shows a meile. What's the meile? As trotzdem was sie gesehen, wie der Friedrich Kohen Gadol hat nicht mehr in Rosh again. Let's look at each one. One person, Kohen Gadol, died. He didn't last for 12 months. So the next Kohen Gadol should have been afraid that he will also not last 12 months. This is not only from one. You see 10 Kohanim, 20 or whatever amount of Kohanim G'delim, every year it changed. So if every year it changed, you know that if you're not worthy, you will die. So if they saw what happened to the one before, they tried to become a Kohen Gadol. They didn't try. They worked on it. They paid for it, knowing that they will die. because they saw from experience what happened the last ones. It's not understood. Each Ken Gadol who bought it knew his level. That he is also not deserving. For he knows that he couldn't get it. He had to pay for it. So obviously he knew that he's not deserving it. But the father, I think, and that's why he had to buy it for money. So he knew that he's not going to live through the year. Is wie kommt es, als soll werden, soll haben als starken Rotzen zum werden Ken Gadol. So why was it that he had such a great desire to come Ken Gadol that he paid money for it, knowing that he's going to die? Nor the beer bezei, the Rebbe says, he explained once before, they chayfe zu truke reinzugehen. In Kodesh HaKadoshim Yom HaKippur, their desire, their longing to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, where the Shechina Sheire Beifen Goli, where the Shechina rests in a revealed way. That desire was so strong. It was worth for each one to go in knowing that they'll die. But it's worth to be in the Kodesh HaKadosh on Yom Kippur with the Shechina rests. It was worth for him to die. So it comes out that the fact that every year was changed, as much as it shows they were not deserving, it brings out a mila also. It brings out that they lasted only for less than 12 months, and nevertheless, the next one wanted. It shows the desire to be close to the Eibush that was so strong by them. The father had me gerufen, Lishkas Ken Gadol, Lishkas Parheden, Eichenem Zman von Kenim Dem Ksherim Tzadikim. That's why they called it Lishkas Parheden, even in the time with the Kenim Dem with Tzadikim. The Mit hat ihm gewollt, Matke an dem Gedele Inye, and the Teierkeit von Areingehen in Kodesh HaKadoshim. By calling it Lishkas Parheden, you showed how precious and important it is, and how much it's important to want it, to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. I feel einen einzig Mal, even once. Und I feel when das ist verbunden mit Ateisof und Epach, even if it's connected to the result will be you lose your life. So what's the purpose? We want to stress that. For what purpose? Und das ist me'ere Ratschuke me'yechedes reinzugehen in Kodesh HaKadoshim eich bei Ken Gadol kosher v'tzadik. Even when they can dealing with tzadikim, there you didn't need that because they're tzadikim, but they still needed or wanted that they should have an extra hisairis in realizing the importance of going to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So every time you mention the name of the Lishka, you say, this Lishka is Parhedrin. It means that people changed every 12 months. Why did they change? Because they had a desire to go in. So this causes that even by a Ken Gadol kosher, and he went in many times to Kodesh HaKadoshim. Jeder Knisses so by him sein Teier Punkt für rein lesen einmal to stress that it should be so precious by him, so important by him, as if this is his first time. So by how do we bring out that importance? By calling it Parhedrin. So now we have an answer why we call it Lishkas Parhedrin. Even in the time when the Kehanim Dalim were good, we said Parhedrin is called to show how bad they were. They changed. They didn't last long. So that should only be when the Kehanim Dalim were not good. But when they were good, you shouldn't do it. Now we understand why, because it also has an aspect of showing the greatness and the importance of going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So everybody should have an extra tshuka, even the good ones. So even in their time, we call Parhedrin. That's not a beer maspik, but still not enough. Their nomen the anhogebility ritzuya from the Kehanim Gedolim, because after all, Taka has an aspect of good, but it still reminds the fact that every year they changed. So b'meila, what's the purpose? Why would that be there even when the Kehanim Gedolim were good? What do we do with that aspect? That aspect was there anyway. So why would they call it Parhedrin when the Kehanim Gedolim were tzadikim? When it brought also out this point. But the Rebbe goes even more the question. Since it had this aspect also to show the negativity of the Kehanim Gedolim, so what's the idea? To establish a name, to set a name that brings out Begilui in a revealed way, the opposite of the Schus of the Eden. Because when you say Lishkas Parhed, the moment you call Lishkas Parhed, and right away it brought out the idea, the Kehanim Gedolim are no good. It had the Mila also, we said before, but it also has this. So why would we establish a name that brings out something that's against the schusim of the Eden? It's against the merits of the Eden. Nochme, go further. The Lishkas Ken Gadol given beike bashlim mafar shivas yomim, wenn man not mafresh given them Ken Gadol. Mainly this Lishka, this room was mainly used when they separated the Kohen Gadol for 7 days before Yom Kippur. What does that mean, separated? Separated from all the Yidden, elevated, become a higher, holier, greater. And when was this? These 7 days, I said, time of Aseret Simichuva, 7 days before Yom Kippur, it's Aseret Simichuva. So this is a special time. We know that the text these are days, it says in Svarim, that we even more have to be careful not to say anything that brings out some kind of discredit of Eden. We never should do it, but this time of the year, Avadanat. This Lishke was a room specially for that time of the year, mainly. And we called it with a name that brings out the opposite of the schus of the Kehanim Gdolim. Shows that they changed every year. And when did we do that? At this time of the year. That's 7 days before Yom Kippur, time of Seder Teshuvah. How does that make sense? We have to say, as in the minyan from Parhedem, you must say that when the fact that they changed every 12 months is in the fact that they changed. So we gave already a mila before. The mila was that it shows how important it's going into the Kedesh HaKadoshim. But that's not the Inyan Ikri, that's a side thing. Along with that, you also see that they changed, which means they were no good. They have to change every 12 months. But Rebbe says that there must be, that's what the Rebbe says, a pirush ikri lemal yusa. Must be, in that gufa, which seems to be negative, there is something good there. And something in the tzaddik dusha, in the holy side. Even though, in simple sense, by many of the Kehanim Gdolim, it showed on something negative, opposite of long life, because they changed, they died, every Kohen Gadol died by the year, so it's opposite. Aber es ist veranderinje von Parhedin, wie das ist bei Kehanim Gdolim gsherim mit tzadikim sherich yomim, amayel Gdolim. But by those Kehanim Gdolim where tzadikim and they live long, this name Parhedin has a big mile. And this will answer the question, why at the time of the Kehanim Gdolim tzadikim, you still called it Parhedin, which you said brings out the change of every 12 months, which seems to be negative. We'll see something positive, and an Inyan Ikri is something important. The flavor of the Rabbi is, I say the pshat is like this. What's the point of the Aved of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur? It's all connected to the Aved of Tshuva. Yom Kippur is the time of Tshuva, and going into the Kedesh HaKadoshim also is part of the Tshuva that happened. So now that we know that going into the Kedesh HaKadoshim is Tshuva, eine von den Meilis in Avedas HaTshuva like Avedas HaTzadikim is one of the specialties in the Aveda of Tshuva over Tzadikim is was Avedas HaTshuva is B'derech Eschatches. Avedas HaTshuva is a renewal. That's what Tshuva does. Explains. Tzadikim Tzadikim always go up also from level to level in their Aveda to the Eibishter. Like it says, Yelchu, Michayel, go from strength to strength. The Gemara says, they go constantly, they don't have a rest, they're always going. Aber, the Loshen is Yelchu Meichayel El Choyel means, das is Yelchu Melchayel, and I'll skip the parenthesis for a second. What he's going to say is that the Darge before, the first, it's a Yelchu Mechayel El Choyel, from one Chayel to another Chayel to another Chayel. So the first Chayel, let's give start from the first. From that Chayel, what happens from that Chayel? You go from that Chayel to the next Chayel. Now, the Rebbe says here in the parentheses that what it means is not just telling us from where you go to where you go. You go from one chayil to another. Mei chayil means ubikeya chayil zeh. The kayach of the first chayil that you stood in a high certain level, gives you the strength and the ability to go higher. Afa Piva says this Rebbe here is very short. But he's marames, he's telling us, this is the pshat here. After people is especially better. I'll tell you what it means like this. What we're going to try to say, what the Rebbe is trying to say here, that Avedas HaTshuva is chachas. Avedas HaTshuva becomes, it's a renewal, you become a new person, so to speak. By la tzaddik, it's not like that. What's a tzaddik? Tzaddik never knew. But the question is, it's not like it. In Chassidus, we know where it says, Yeilchu Machayel Ochoyel, to go, doesn't mean to go be'erech, which means one madrege is in relationship to the madrege before. The real halicha, the little going means be'ein areich. It's like jumping. Like this, when you go, let's say there's a chain. So the second part of the chain, second link is connected to the first. The third is connected to the second. So since this third is connected to the second and the second connected to the first, so the third never left. You go 20 links and it's always still connected to the first because one is connected to the other. You go be'ein areich means when you jump, but there's no connection. And it always says that the word yechol machayel achoyel represents that madrege. Shalei be'erech. It's not be'erech. It's not in any relationship, not any comparison to the one before. So if you go and you connect it to the one before, you could go very far, but you still never left. But by the yechol machayel achoyel, it says you did leave. So the Rebbe says here, yeah, true, you left. It means it's be'ein areich, but still. It's taken from the chayil before. The first level is the one that pushes you to the next level. So it's ahisofa and ilui. It's in addition to what you had before. So what you had before is there, and now this gives you koyach to go further. So as much as the second step is bein arech to the first, the third is bein arech to the second. Nevertheless, it's all connected. From tshuva to tshuva accomplishes a mavert a mitzias chadosh become a complete new mitzias. Besides the tshuva can aid zognev sich tshuva a person could say on himself. The Rambam says, "Eini eisa ish osa eisa maisim." I'm not the same person as the one that did the avera, that did whatever he did. So tshuva means completely becoming new. Und die Schleimus von der Minyan wird aufgetan in der Vedas kein Godel wie im Kippurim Kedesh HaKadoshim. So where do you get the Schleimus of the Minyan of Tshuva, the completion? The highest level of Tshuva is the Kedesh HaKadoshim, and the Kein Godel goes in. So there is the real Chidush of a person becoming new, or Yidden becoming like a new people, which is through Tshuva, is the Inyan of going into Kedesh HaKadoshim. Und davon bekommt jeder Yid dem Keach zu übergeben in der Kotze la Kotze, bis zu übermachen sich in der Metzias Chadoshe, from the Ken Godel and the Kedesh HaKadoshim, where he becomes a new person. All the Yidden have the care to become like new people through Tshuva. But this is also the explanation, the inner pshat, in them Dina, the big love and Shevet Ken Godel behem b'yem hatzayim, ein Eivet behem pam shnir leilum. The Din Rambam is that the special begodim, the special garments that the Kohen used to go into the Kedesh HaKadoshim in Kippur, he can't use it again. He can't use it next year. It'll be hidden in the place where it takes him off. It says, that's the din. So you can't use the begodim from this year, Ken Godel, his begodim going into Kedesh HaKadoshim to next year. The question is, why shouldn't you use the same next year? Like all other garments of the Kohen, of Ken Godel, in Velches is Nitoken Akbol is one Hashimish Bayam. There's no limit of when you could use it. You didn't use it only once, you used it as long as it lasted. So why the begodim of the Kohen Gadol in the Kedesh HaKadoshim could only be used once, and next year you can't use it. And especially the Rebbe Hoyer, I want to mention, as begodim the Kohen Gadol's begodim are called lekovet l'seforos for beauty. When you make beautiful clothes, it lasts longer because you make it stronger, you make it better, lasts longer. So this is more Ma'arich Yom. So you can't say maybe the begodim got used up. If by other big dikhuna, you could use it over and over and again, even if you use it many times, you can still use it. Here, it's only used once, and it lasts long anyway. So why shouldn't you be able to use it again? The Asbara says now the explanations as based on what we said before. Since Kedesh HaKadoshim didn't of tshuva, so every time the Ken Gadol went to Kedesh HaKadoshim, he became a new being, a new Metzias. Even the next year, he's a new person, Lagabe, even the way he was in the Kedesh HaKadoshim last year. Not only goes to a higher level, gets transformed, he gets changed. In Metzias Chadosh, a new Metzias. That's why his garments have to be new, not the same ones as was last year. Especially when it has to be bring covet and beauty. Now, beauty is something for later, for further. It's concerning somebody else. Beauty isn't the way you look in the eyes of others. So here, when he's with his begodim, he's supposed to bring covet and tiferes, besides what he is. So the covet and tiferes that you have the next year is a covet and tiferes that's completely new, like the one you had before. When this is the Teichen from Parheden Malyusa, this is the meaning of that it's called Parheden, that it changed every year in the good side. In Gashmi, some say Ma'arich Yomim. We're talking about the Tzaddikim, and we're looking for a reason why in their time when the Kehan got dealing with Tzaddikim, they were called Parheden. So like this, in Gashmi, some say Ma'arich Yomim. In Gashmi, we're talking about the Kehan that lived long. Aber Beruchnis is going to machlifnes im Koshen was Chedish. Beruchnis, they were changed every year. Durch the Knesset Kiddush HaKadoshim wird man Metzias Chadosha. Going into Kiddush HaKadoshim become a new person. Das ist nicht derselbe King Godel, was ist rein for Jordan Kiddush HaKadoshim. It's not the same King Godel that went in. So here we know why, even the time when the Kehanim Delum Tzadikim, you still call it Parhedrin because it represents the change. So it's not only negative, it shows a good change by them that every year they got changed to new Metzias. Die dem Bier ist verstandig, als der Teichen in von Verhedrin, wie das ist mal Yusse, ist do in alles Manim. That you understand that the way we explain now, the Mila of Verhedrin, that they change every 12 months. There's always. Eich we bei Srischen, we chiz bei Sheni, when there's ein Gewen Kehanim Gdelim, Ksherim et Tzadikim Sherichim, even the time, first Beis HaMikdash, the beginning, the second Beis HaMikdash, they were Tzadikim, and they lived long. And you also want to use the word Parhedrin for them the way it's Lamaila. Wir hätten verstehen, was Rabbi HaKodesh hat die Mishnah reingestellt, beide Nehmen, sei Lischkas or Eid, sei Lischkas Verhedrin. Now we'll explain also why Rabbi HaKodesh established the Mishnah, the Mishnah is, he put in both names. He put in the name Lischkas or Eid, and he used the name Lischkas Verhedrin. Weil die zwei Nehmen seien Maramas of die zwei Yone Aveda, was davon sein beim Kein Godel, because these two things represent the two Inyonim, the two types of Aveda that have to be by the Kein Godel. Eitz is B'chinas Chesed. We said Eitz, as we said before, Eitz, a tree, is Chesed. Shows Arichas Yomim. But das ist der Linie von Avedas HaTzadikim. We said Avedas HaTzadikim is Chesed, and there's no change, it's just Chesed, and then goes for Arichas Yomim. Parhedrin was is Merames of Avedas HaTshuva, but there's also called Parhedrin because it represents Tshuva. We said Parhedrin means you were new every year, because with Tshuva you become new. So this is another point that the Rebbe makes why we had these two names. One is to represent the Dinyan of Avedas HaTzadikim, which is Chesed, and one is to represent the Avedas HaTshuva, which is the Dinyan of becoming new. This fits to what my father writes, that there's a meaning of the word Parhedrin. What does he write? As is Remes of Dinim. It represents Dinim. We have Chesed and we have Gvura. Gvura is Dinim. Parhedrin, the word Parhedrin is a hint for Dinim. For in Parhedrin is zunächst gestellt von drei Wörter. The word Parhedrin, the Rebbe's father writes, is made up of three words. Par, Har, and Din. Was jeder von sie Deiton of Din. Einstein Protis, look at details what he writes, that each one of these say a Par and say a Har. Par is a bull, and Har is a mountain, and Din is judgment. All three represent Dinim. Now we understand why. While the Aveda from Tshuva, since we said that Aveda, one of the Avedas of the King Godel was Tshuva, the Aveda from Tshuva, it has to do with Din, with judgment, and with Gvura. Where do we see it? The Baal Tshuva darf sich machen, it says by Baal Tshuva has to limit himself. Baal Tshuva has to make sure that certain things he has to make fences. And Aveda shel Gvura b'din. It's Gvura, and Gvura means to hold back. So he has to hold himself back on certain things. The reason is because since before he did Avedas, and if he doesn't make extra, be careful in certain things, he might go back. But the bottom line is there are certain in making himself Gdorim, he shouldn't go back to the way it was before. There's an Aveda of Gvura b'din. Bechlal is it nur from Tshuva in the Pchina for Smel Dechet. Tshuva Bechlal is like the left hand which pushes away. Why is it like the left hand? Is sich mashpil mit seiner Richut be'erich von Lakus. But Tshuva lowers himself, feels very low because of him being far from Hashem, because of what he did. Und zu dem Meister von der Alamas Vestede, was kommen von seinen Chatoim. And he also feels bad about the narrowness, so to speak, and the concealments of Lakus that comes because of his sins. So it's all connected to Kavura. So it fits. That's why there were two names. There was a name Eitz, which is Chesed, and that's the Avedas HaTzadikim, and the other one is because of Dinyan Parhedrin is Avedas HaTshuva, and that's Gvura, Chesed and Gvura, and it puts it all fit together. The Yom Tov is that this will make it even sweeter. Was Rabbeinu HaKodesh the zwei Namen in Mishnah is reingestellt darf gebet Masei. The way Rabbeinu HaKodesh put these two names. Lishkas Ha'etz im Mesichta Midas. Und Hashem, Lishkas Parhedrin hat gestellt im Mesichta Yume. In Mesichta Midas, he refers to this Lishkas Ha'etz. Where does he refer to it? Lishkas Parhedrin in Mesichta Yume. Why? Weil der Chiluk zwischen die zwei Mesichtes ist wie der Unterschied zwischen Avedas HaTzadikim und Avedas HaTshuva. Because the difference between these two Mesichtes is the similar difference to Tzadikim and Tshuva. Why? The Teichen of Mesichta Midas hat Ashaychas Avedas HaTzadikim. What Mesichta Midas talks about has to do with the Aved of Tzadikim. The Tati Mevayer, as the Rebbe says, my father explains that Mesichta Midas Meire Eich Niv Dabei Sheni B'Tchila. It shows how the Beis Hamikdash Hasheni, the segment was built. how it was built. Now, in the beginning, in the beginning, they were tzaddikim. When they built the Bayis Sheni, they were tzaddikim. So Masechta Midas talks about what they did at the time they were tzaddikim. And I'll skip the brackets for a moment, and then we'll go back to it. Shenke Masechta Yume is Teichen Avedis Yom Kippur, which Avedis Tshuva, and Yume talks about Yom Kippur, which is Tshuva. So we see that the union of Lishka Seitz has to do with Chesed, has to Avedis Tzaddikim, and that's the Masechta Midas, which is Avedis Tzaddikim, and Masechta Yume is Avedis Tshuva. There it talks about the union. There it mentions the union of Parhedrin, which is the union of Tshuva. Now the Rebbe says here in the brackets, V'yashleimar. When the Rebbe says, my father says that Masechta Midas talks about Savedis Tzadikim, and what did he say how? Because Masechta Midas talks about the beginning of the Bayis Sheni, and the beginning of the Bayis Sheni were Tzadikim. But the Rebbe says there's more to it, and because it's so simple, what the Rebbe is going to add now, my father didn't even have to stress it, didn't have to mention. Number one is Asher. The word Midas is Meloshe Midah. The word Midas means measurement. That's what the Masechta is all about. Was the spice of Avedis Tzadikim was with a Seder Vadrogim Dittabag Tzadikim, it's limited, and it goes with an order with a Seder. So that's why Masechta Midas talks about Avedis Tzadikim. And the second thing, Chazal Zognen, Man Midas, Rebbe Lozer ben Yankiv. Who's Midas? Who's the person, the Tana, who says the dinim of Masechta Midas? Rebbe Lozer ben Yankiv, as Mishnos is Kav Enoki. The Mishnah, the teaching of Rebbe Lozer ben Yankiv is Kav means it's very little, but Noki, it's very clean. But Dosi Bedugim is Avedis Tzadikim. That's like Avedis Tzadikim. Avidosim is in Yone Eir, Onken Teruvas Chesed. The Avedis Tzadikim is light. Tshuva has to do with darkness. You have to get out of the darkness. Avedis Tzadikim, you're only dealing with light. You're doing good and you're going better and better and better. That fits to Rebbe Lozer ben Yankiv, who his learning is Kav Enoki. It's like a little, but it's clean. That means it's good. There's no darkness there. Schenken, the Masechta Yume, is Avedis Yom Kippur, which is Avedis Tshuva. Pikol anal vet melech verstehen. Was der Eitz von Lishkas HaKohen Gadol gedarf sein zugedeckt mit Zid. We're going back now to the beginning of the Sikha. The question was, there was wood in Lishkas Eitz, made of wood, but it was covered with stone, covered with seed. Seed is the plaster. And the question is, why does it have to be covered? Mainly in the time when the Kohen Gadol were not tzaddikim, you have to be covered because what Eitz represented wasn't there. But by the Kohen Gadol tzaddikim, so it fit to the wood. So even though there's a din that you can't have the wood seen, but what's the reason behind it? When there's the reason, what's the teichon of it in Pnimius when it's scanning daily with tzaddikim? So the wood, which represents arichas yomim, which fits to them, should be open. Why was it covered? Now we'll understand why. Well, the roof of an Avedis Kohen Gadol being Mekippurim is need the rinyan for an Avedis tzaddikim mechshuva, because if we talk generally about what was the Aved of Kohen Gadol, what's the specialty of the Kohen Gadol in Kippur in the Kedesh HaKadoshim? Was not tzaddik, not the way that's taken tshuva. But so them is mutgesh need the rinyan from the arichas yomim. When it comes to tshuva, tshuva is not that arichas yomim comes from in the way that's tzaddikim. Nor in a gewissen Sinn verkehrt, wie Azeh wird am Tzias Chadosha. When we look at what the way that's tzaddikim, what the way that's tshuva is, as we said before, that you become someone else, you change. So it's not arichas yomim, even though it doesn't mean physically that you die, but nevertheless it shows a stop. You are a certain person now, and that's over. That's the opposite of Arichas Yomim. That's really what the Avedis of Kippur and Kiddush Kadosim is. Now, Alpha Pekein is the Nomen part Hedrin. Geworden lacher wie es sein gewende Kern, sein gewende komisch like the boy. So he says like this. So we gave it a name Avedis Hedrin because it's Avedis Tshuva. And Avedis Tshuva is a change. So by Hedrin means a change every 12 months. But Lapel Mamish, we said that name Farhedrin was not given to later. Originally, it was not called Farhedrin. So he says, Alpha Pekein is the Nomen Farhedrin geworden, lacher wir seinen Gewen, the Kenim Gdelim was einen Gewen, it only happened when the Kenim Gdelim were not the way it's supposed to be. And the answer is, Val Kolzman, the Kenim Gdelim was einen Gewen Tzadikim. As long as the Kenim Gdelim were Tzadikim, Tzadem was Klolos Adore Gewen on Adarke for Tzadikim. They were Tzadikim because everybody, the whole generation was basically Tzadikim. Even though generally the Aved of Kohen Gadol in Kedesh HaKadoshim is Avedis Tshuva, the sober beike the rinyan for Tshuva tzadikim. It's taka Tshuva, but not the regular Tshuva of tzadikim, because mainly it was the time when they were tzadikim. Okay, du the rinyan von Tshuva is nicht nur auf Averes, nor efrichuk von Eibishim tzadiridus and neshama lemata beguf. We know that Tshuva not always is dafka and Averes. In Chassidus it says Tshuva could be even when a person Doesn't do any. A tzaddik also has to do tshuva. Why? Because tshuva also means to return. So a person's neshama, when it was lamaila, was not always, was definitely closer to Hashem down here. As great as he is down here, it's still not as close as there. And a person has to strive. Even the tzaddik should be loshev. He should return back to that level. That's the avodas tshuva. So you have that type of tshuva. When dit nuaf and tshuva is by tzaddikim. This idea of tshuva is even by tzaddikim also. So tzaddikim have also tshuva, but this type of tshuva. So as long as they're kehanim gdelim with tzaddikim, so even though generally going in Kedesh HaKadoshim was the union of tshuva, but it was tshuva the way it was according to that generation, tshuva of tzaddikim. Und wir bald bei tzaddikim nitoder arus und der Antleifen von Eretz Yivitz Amobes. By tzaddikim, the tshuva is not to run away from a desert, run away from a place where you're thirsty, run away from bad. The riber is there Simoyen und the tshuva von der tzaddik nit an tazashturim. So the thirst and the tshuva of the tzaddik is not in such so strong. We said by tshuva you completely you get out of yourself. But by tzaddikim the tshuva is not with the same storm, we call it, not with the same level that it goes out of completely your agbolas. My time is that Ishema Lishka down Lishka Seitz. So that's why it's called Lishka Seitz. Because the main thing is not the tshuva, the main thing is the tzaddikim, which is the chesed, which is the eitz, so it's called lishkas eitz. Davkin dem zman with the kenim gdelim seine gewen nit ken ksherim, only in the time when they were not kosher. But those who gekommen hat matzah from clothes hador, because the whole generation was not so good. Is the avedas tshuva from them ken godel be mekipurim gewen uftom am der tshuva kipshute. The aved of ken godel was the cause by the Eden simple tshuva. But the tshuva davkin nemt arus haiden bekommt dit is magbolos. And this takes a yid out from all limitations. Makes him for a new metzias. And therefore, the concept of parheden, we said before, shows that you become a new metzias. That only really happened after it's like the Kehanim they were not such tzaddik. So they had to really do tshuva. So then you started calling it parheden to stress that you change. While before, when they were tzaddikim, you didn't call it parheden, you called it lishkas eitz because the concept of eitz was there. It still had to be covered. But nevertheless, it was called still Lishkas Eitz.